This is Atomic Biscuits, and I'm your host, BACFA. To Anew Atomic Biscuits. This is Atomic Biscuits 2025-01-26. Anew again. I want to do a little old school Atomic Biscuits today, which is going to be a little more stream of consciousness. Normally, I would go through what I think is interesting in the RSS feeds that I've collected and in the sources I've collected, and I would find things that I would think would be of most value to you and share them with you. Oftentimes it's stories overlooked by the mainstream media, or we examine mainstream media's coverage and look for bias and that kind of stuff, propaganda. This week, though, because of the inauguration of Donald Trump, I wanted to go ahead and prepare this on January 21st for airing later, because I wanted to capture what the zeitgeist was on day one after Trump was reinstalled as president. We can scan around and just see, so it's going to be a little more stream of consciousness and a little less prepared, but I hope you'll forgive the bumps and bruises. This is the way we used to do it, old school, in the old times, back on other platforms. I'm going to start here with theblaze.com, and I'll leave the links for this and all the stories that we decide to cover here on Atomic Biscuits. I'll leave the links out on my Gab account at BACFA. That's for Bread and Circuses for America. Al Sharpton threatens black boycott against companies dropping DEI programs. You want to put us back in the back of the bus. That sounds like Sharpton. Nan activists instead of showing up to support the president. Sharpton reportedly makes hundreds of thousands of dollars from his nonprofit activist network. Race activist Al Sharpton announced a boycott against companies that drop reinforcing diversity, equity, and inclusion policies after newly inaugurated President Donald Trump issued an executive order against DEI. Sharpton posted the threat on social media with a statement comparing himself to Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. Why do we have DEI? We have DEI because you denied us diversity, you denied us equity, you denied us inclusion. DEI was a remedy to the racial, institutionalized bigotry practiced in academia and in those corporations. Now, if you want to put us back in the back of the bus, we're going to do the Dr. King Rosa Parks on you, Sharpton said at the Metropolitan AME Church in Washington, D.C. Sharpton said his racial activist nonprofit, National Action Network, NAN, will form a council to eventually get around to boycotting two companies. NAN and its allies form a council that over the next 90 days will examine what companies have shirked on their DEI commitments as well as their profit margins, he wrote. Two companies will then be subject to this spring a boycott by Black Americans whom McKinsey estimates will have a collective buying power of $1.7 trillion by 2030. Trump has made DEI one of his targets in the dozens of executive orders issued for his second term. His order designated that only two genders would be recognized by the U.S. government. Sharpton has faced some criticism after he gave a softball interview to Kamala Harris during her presidential campaign, and his nonprofit received a donation of $500,000. The Harris campaign spent a record $1 billion and lost to Trump while losing control of the U.S. Senate and letting Republicans maintain control of the U.S. House of Representatives. The nonprofit reportedly paid Sharpton $650,000 in 2021. That's again over at theblaze.com. Okay, so I'm going to tool around a little bit here and see what I can see. Some of this will be interesting, some of it not. It's not rehearsed, it's not edited, so it may your mileage may vary from previous episodes. We have this story also over at Blaze. Trump announces America's withdrawal from the World Health Organization by Joseph McKenna. Now, I have my own thoughts about this. I think that the main reason for this is that it used to be that the UN and the World Health Organization were sort of a collective organization where we could go and contribute to a global need for good, for improving things, especially in the third world. It also helped us meet together and build bridges and then focus on the things that unite us rather than the things that divide us as people across the globe. Well, over time, it hasn't really fulfilled those sorts of dreams and hopes. The UN has devolved into something pretty scary, and the UN and the World Health Organization tried to create treaty type agreements that would give them enforcement powers to send in blue helmets from the UN or whatnot whenever they declared a pandemic, which would effectively be like wartime powers. Um, no, we're not going to let you just decide to come on in and invade and lock up people, and that's not how America works. And I think that, thank goodness, we've got the power of the pen to enforce that. That's just not how it's going to work. Biden halted Trump's previous withdrawal since no such obstacle now exists. America will soon be rid of the WHO. I think that we're probably going to just stop sending money to these things and let them die on the vine. President Donald Trump announced America's withdrawal from scandal-plagued World Health Organization late in his first term, citing the organization's poor response to COVID-19, its apparent willingness to help the communist Chinese regime cover up the spread of the virus, and its refusal to adopt urgently needed reforms. The withdrawal was set to go into effect on July 6, 2021, but former President Joe Biden swooped in to keep America's membership in the globalist outfit up to date. Biden is gone, and Trump's withdrawal plan is back. In his Monday executive order to sever all ties with the WHO, Trump reiterated his previous issues with the organization, then noted that the WHO continues to demand unfairly onerous payments from the United States, far out of proportion with other countries' assessed payments. China, with a population of 1.4 billion, has 300% of the population of the United States, yet contributes nearly 90% less to the WHO. Now, with the shoe on the other foot, Trump revoked Biden's January 20th, 2021 letter to the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, wherein the elder Democrat indicated he was reversing course and remaining a member, as well as Biden's Executive Order 13987, the supposed purpose of which was to improve federal coordination when responding to the pandemic. Trump directed Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russell Vought, the prospective director of the Office of Management and Budget, to pause the future transfer of any cash, support, or resources to the WHO at a time when American taxpayers are on the hook for funding over 15% of the organization's annual budget. Recall and reassign American personnel or contractors working in any capacity with the organization. Identify American and international partners who could assume necessary activities previously undertaken by the WHO, and jettison the Biden administration's 2024 U.S. Global Health Security Strategy as soon as possible. Although there is once again a great deal of pearl clutching about breaking it off with what appears to be in some ways a wealth redistribution scheme, the WHO has repeatedly proven itself to be incompetent and in the pocket of America's adversaries. For instance, the WHO told the nations of the world not to restrict travelers from China or close their borders, even though China had done so domestically at the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic, gave Beijing a veto over the WHO's COVID-19 origins report, endorsed vaccines that proved to be neither safe nor effective, including the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine, whose developer admitted can cause deadly blood clots, and attracted criticism over its sexual abuse scandal, wasteful spending, sloppy scientific research, and corruption. America's withdrawal is all the more timely because of the continued desire by WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus and others to foist a global pandemic pact on member nations, Globalists convened at the World Health Assembly last year failed to produce a draft of the pact, which has been identified by American critics as a threat to national sovereignty. However, Ghebreyesus hinted at the likelihood of trying again while clamping down on anti-vaxxers in the meantime. Trump tasked Rubio in his executive order with also ending further negotiations on the pandemic pact as well as amendments to the international health regulations. World Health ripped us off, Trump reportedly said on Monday. Everybody rips off the United States. It's not going to happen anymore. America's withdrawal will be complete within a year of the Trump administration's official notification to the UN and the WHO. The World Health Organization regrets the announcement that the United States of America intends to withdraw from the organization, the WHO said in a statement Tuesday. We hope the United States will reconsider, and we look forward to engaging in constructive dialogue to maintain the partnership between the USA and WHO. Again, that's over at theblaze.com. Man, it was a flurry of executive orders. So many things happened on day one. Now, let's look at this one. This is coming from the Drudge Report. It's not something I would normally cover, but we're just going to filter through these as it happens, kind of like a Sunday news or the Sunday papers that I used to do, right? This is from the AP. But it was picked up by Drudge Report, which is a fairly left-leaning organization now. It didn't used to be. It used to be pretty decent, really. Now it's kind of trash. Ain't no telling what we got here. So let's have a look at apnews.com. Trump grants sweeping pardon of January 6 defendants, including rioters who violently attacked police. This is by Alana Durkin-Richer and Michael Kunzelman. Washington, AP. President Donald Trump has pardoned, commuted the prison sentences, or vowed to dismiss the cases of all of the 1,500-plus people charged with crimes in the January 6, 2021 U.S. Capitol riot, including people convicted of assaulting police officers, using his clemency powers on his first day back in office to undo the massive prosecution of the unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy. Trump's action, just hours after his return to the White House on Monday, paved the way for the release from prison of people found guilty of violent attacks on police, as well as leaders of far-right extremist groups convicted of failed plots to keep the Republican in power after he lost the 2020 presidential election to Democrat Joe Biden. The pardons are a culmination of Trump's years-long campaign to rewrite the history of the January 6th attack, which left more than 100 police officers injured as the angry mob of Trump supporters, some armed with poles, bats, and bear spray, overwhelmed law enforcement, shattered windows, and sent lawmakers and aides running into hiding. While pardons were expected, the speed and scope of the clemency amounted to a stunning dismantling of the Justice Department's effort to hold participants accountable over what has been described as one of the darkest days in the country's history. Trump also ordered the Attorney General to seek the dismissal of roughly 450 cases that are pending before judges, stemming from the largest investigation in Justice Department history. Well, it goes on. I thought the pearl clutching was over. Casting the rioters as patriots and hostages, Trump has claimed they were unfairly treated by the Justice Department, which also charged him with federal crimes in 2 cases he contends were politically motivated. Trump said the pardons will end a grave national injustice that has been perpetrated among the American people over the last 4 years, and begin a process of national reconciliation. The pardons were met with elation from Trump supporters and lawyers for the January 6th defendants. Trump supporters gathered late Monday in the cold outside the Washington jail, where more than a dozen defendants were being held before the pardons. There's some pictures here. We are deeply thankful for President Trump for his actions today, said James Lee Bright, an attorney who represented Oath Keepers founder Stewart Rhodes, who was serving an 18-year prison sentence after being convicted of seditious conspiracy and other crimes. It's unclear how quickly the defendants may be released from prison. An attorney for Enrique Tarrio, the former Proud Boys national chairman, who was sentenced to 22 years in prison for seditious conspiracy, said he expected his client to be released from prison Monday night. This marks a pivotal moment in our client's life, and it symbolizes a turning point for our nation. Attorney Naeeb Hassan said in a statement, "We are optimistic for the future as we now turn the page on this chapter, embracing new possibilities and opportunities." Democrats slammed the move to extend the pardons to violent rioters, many of whose crimes were captured on camera and broadcast on live television. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called it an outrageous insult to our justice system and the heroes who suffered physical scars and emotional trauma as they protected the Capitol, the Congress, and the Constitution. Donald Trump is ushering in a golden age for people that break the law and attempt to overthrow the government, Senate Democrat leader Chucky Schumer said in an email statement. Former Metropolitan Police Officer Michael Fanoni, who lost consciousness and suffered a heart attack after a rioter shocked him with a stun gun, appeared taken aback to learn from an Associated Press reporter that those who assaulted police officers are among the pardon recipients. "This is what the American people voted for," he said. "How do you react to something like that?" Fanoni said he has spent the last 4 years worried about his safety and the well-being of his family. Pardoning his assailants only compounds his fears, he said. "I think they're cowards," he said. "Their strength was in their numbers and the mob mentality, and as individuals, they are who they are." Trump had suggested in the weeks leading up to his return to the White House that instead of blanket pardons, he would look at the January 6th defendants on a case-by-case basis. And Vice President J.D. Vance had said just days ago that people responsible for the violence during the Capitol riot obviously should not be pardoned. 14 defendants, including several convicted of seditious conspiracy, had their sentences commuted, while the rest of those found guilty of January 6 crimes were granted full, complete, and unconditional pardons. The pardons come weeks after the Justice Department abandoned its 2 federal criminal cases against Trump, citing its policy against prosecuting sitting presidents. Had Trump lost the 2024 election, he may have ultimately stood trial on charges in the same federal courthouse in Washington in the case that had accused him of conspiring to overturn his 2020 election loss in a desperate bid to cling to power. More than 1,200 people across the U.S. have been convicted of January 6 crimes over the last 4 years, including roughly 200 people who pled guilty to assaulting law enforcement. Hundreds of January 6 defendants who didn't engage in any of the violence and destruction were charged with misdemeanor trespassing offenses, and many of those served little to no time behind bars. But the violence that day has been documented extensively through videos, testimony, and other evidence seen by judges and jurors in the courthouse that it's within view of the Capitol. Police were dragged into the crowd and beaten. Rioters used makeshift weapons to attack police, including flagpoles, a crutch, and a hockey stick. Investigators documented a number of firearms in the crowd, along with knives, a pitchfork, a tomahawk axe, brass knuckle gloves, and other weapons. Officers have described in testimony fearing for their lives as members of the mob hurled insults and obscenities at them. Of the more than 1,500 people charged, about 250 people were convicted of crimes by a judge or jury after the trial, while more than 1,000 others had pled guilty to offenses. Only 2 people were acquitted of all charges by judges after bench trials. No jury has fully acquitted a Capitol riot defendant. More than 1,000 rioters had been sentenced, with over 700 receiving at least some time behind bars. The rest were given some combination of probation, community service, home detention, or fines. And, Alana Durkin-Richer, God bless you. Bless your heart, as we say here in the South. What a load of hoo-ha. I mean, there is nothing here about who orchestrated the mess, how infested the people were with agents provocateur who pushed things into action, who characterized these patriots who were showing up to support the president and going to the Capitol. All of the things that happened at the Capitol that were violent happened while Trump was speaking at the Ellipse. He ran long and it threw their timetable off. So the people who were at the Ellipse aren't the people at the Capitol riot. They hadn't gotten there yet. And so, of course, there's nothing to review because Liz Cheney and her tribe shredded all the evidence. And anyway, you know the story. That's what the AP is feeling today. A little pain point, I think. Next story here in the feed is from the Heritage Foundation. Let's see, it's the Foundry is referring over to dailysignal.com. Heritage Foundation experts analyze Trump's executive orders. This is a staff story. President Donald Trump signed a flurry of executive orders his first day in office. His executive orders covered policies related to the economy, the border, gender ideology, and more. Below, we round up analysis from the Heritage Foundation's policy experts on these executive orders. This article will be regularly updated to include new analyses. Military's role in protecting territorial integrity. President Donald Trump on Monday issued an executive order clarifying the military's role in protecting the territorial integrity of the United States to ensure that the United States Armed Forces prioritize the protection of U.S. sovereignty and territorial integrity along our national borders. The President ordered the U.S. Northern Command to deliver its plan to seal the borders and maintain U.S. sovereignty, territorial integrity, and security by repelling forms of invasion and mass migration, as well as narcotics and human smuggling and trafficking. The order also requires U.S. Northcom to provide a steady state campaign plan and continuous assessments to achieve those goals, securing our borders. Another Trump executive order, securing our borders, calls for the federal government to take all appropriate action to, as the title implies, secure the U.S.'s borders. The order notes that we now have millions of illegal aliens in our midst, including potential terrorists, foreign spies, members of cartels, and other threats who need to be identified and removed. Consistent with Heritage's recommendations, the President ordered many specific measures, including the resumption of building the wall at the southern border and ending catch and release of aliens caught entering illegally. His order also ends the Biden administration's categorical parole programs and the Department of Abuse of CBP one application to allow aliens to schedule illegal entry into the United States. And this is from Simon Hankinson, Senior Research Fellow at Border Security and Immigration Center at the Heritage Foundation. We could see that the CBP-1 application, which arrived on Obama phones and other things, was given to these illegal aliens to help them schedule a flight right over into Chicago or when to show up for their border judge. And these guys are just being, stamped through like, hey, are you here for work? Okay, go on. I mean, there was just really not a whole lot of filtering going on. It was pump in as many illegal immigrants as possible. The next part of the story reads, rescinding Biden's executive orders on gender identity, DEI, and more. In his executive order, initial rescissions of harmful executive orders and actions, President Donald Trump revoked 67 executive orders issued by his predecessor and 11 presidential memoranda. They cover everything from gender identity, the climate crisis, and diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility to withdrawing areas of the country from oil or gas leasing, rescinding Cuba's designation as a state sponsor of terrorism, and weakening enforcement of our immigration laws. In revoking these orders and memoranda, Trump says that the Biden administration embedded deeply unpopular, inflationary, illegal, and radical practices within every agency and office of the federal government. The injection of DEI into our institutions has corrupted them by replacing hard work, merit, and equality with a divisive and dangerous preferential hierarchy. On immigration, Trump says Biden's orders opened the borders and endangered the American people. The orders on the climate amounted to extremism that exploded inflation and overburdened businesses with regulations. Executive orders are not the legal equivalent of laws passed by Congress. They are orders from the president as the chief executive directing the behavior and actions of federal agencies and employees in carrying out their responsibilities under those laws and the duties of the president as the commander in chief. And this is Hans von Spakovsky writing that one. Restoring accountability to policy influencing positions. President Trump issued an executive order restoring accountability to policy influencing positions within the federal workforce, which reinstates Trump's Executive Order 13957 of October 21st, 2020. Trump's original executive order created, and this executive order restores, Schedule F, or Schedule Policy/Career, which is a new class of accepted service for career civil servants in positions of a confidential, policy determining, policy making, or policy advocating character. The directive also calls for guidance from the director of the Office of Personnel Management about additional categories of positions that the administration should consider for schedule policy/career. The executive order specifies that employees in schedule policy/career positions are not required to personally or politically support the current president or the policies of the current administration, but they are required to faithfully implement administration policies to the best of their ability, consistent with their constitutional oath and the vesting of executive authority solely in the president. Failure to do so is grounds for dismissal. Because the Biden administration finalized a rule to undo Trump's initial creation of Schedule F, much of this new executive order is inoperable until the Trump administration reverses the Biden-era rule that the executive order specifies. The director of the Office of Personnel Management, director, shall promptly amend the civil service regulations to rescind all changes made by the Biden administration's final rule upholding civil service protections and merit system principles. The purpose of the rule is to ensure accountability for individuals who hold policy influencing roles so they cannot resist, undermine, and slow walk administrative directives without consequence. That's by Rachel Gressler. And I mean, isn't that what you want in a boss? That you need to be able to fire people who just won't do what you need them to do. If you've got an agenda and they decide, well, they're just not going to do it, then you should have the power to get rid of them. And that seems like an obvious thing for those of us who work in the private sector, but in government, you got to lay it out explicitly. Another of Trump's executive orders realigning the United States Refugee Admissions Program suspends the USRAP until the further entry of refugees aligns with U.S. interests. The suspension takes effect January 27th to allow traveling refugees to arrive in the U.S. The order directs the Secretary of Homeland Security and the Attorney General to 1. Propose how state and local jurisdictions can have greater involvement in determining the placement or resettlement of refugees, and 2. Submit a report to the President every 90 days regarding whether resumption of refugee entries would be in the United States' interests. Heritage has called for the suspension of immigration benefit applications when unmanageable application backlog exists. This is by Simon Hankinson, Senior Research Fellow. Trump on Monday issued an executive order protecting the United States from foreign terrorists and other national security and public safety threats, which directs the Departments of State and Homeland Security to enhance the vetting of aliens both before they come to the United States and while they're here. The order seeks to return to the more stringent screening of foreign nationals that was in place when Trump left office in January of 2021. It requires United States security officials to identify any countries for which vetting and screening information is so deficient as to warrant a partial or full suspension on allowing their nationals into the United States. This order requires a review of visa programs to ensure integrity and assess risks. It also requests that the United States senior security officials recommend actions to protect Americans from aliens who advocate sectarian violence, preach hate, or aid terrorists. Heritage has explained the legality of enhanced vetting and travel restrictions during Trump's first term And it also supports enforcing immigration laws against temporary visa holders who support terrorist organizations. That's also by Simon Hankinson. President Donald Trump issued an executive order unleashing American energy resources, which will begin reversing the energy crisis created by the previous administration through its radical anti-energy agenda. This executive order lays out a bold policy agenda that encourages resource development, including rare earth minerals, prioritizes access to abundant energy supplies, eliminates the electric vehicle mandate, protects consumer choices of appliances, and eliminates federal funding for programs that stand in the way of these objectives. To achieve these goals, the order calls for an immediate review of all regulations, orders, guidance, policy, settlements, and other federal actions that create barriers to American energy development and creates a process to implement reform. Critically, the order also brings former President Joe Biden's disastrous climate policies to an end. It starts by disbanding the Interagency Working Group on the Social Cost of Greenhouse Gases, which provided the highly questionable framework for most federal actions related to global warming policies. It also revokes, rescinds, or reverses all or most aspects of nearly every executive action taken on climate, including pausing any actions associated with the Green New Deal as implemented by the Inflation Reduction Act. It then terminates, defunds, and abolishes the offices and programs associated with those activities. Finally, the order begins the process of cutting the red tape facing America's energy and infrastructure industries. That includes directing federal agency and council heads to take all available actions to eliminate permitting delays and to expedite the adjudication of federal permits. It also begins the process of implementing long-term reform by ordering White House officials to prepare recommendations to Congress for more sweeping reforms of the permitting and environmental review process for energy and infrastructure projects. The order also rescinds Executive Order 11991 of 1997, which is the only explicit authority for the White House Council on Environmental Quality's so-called regulation of the National Environmental Policy Act. Therefore, the order arguably leaves the CEQ regulation without force and effect. That sets the stage for White House guidance for agencies that is prescriptive and mandatory for agencies not judicially enforceable. The Heritage Foundation has consistently argued that the United States should develop its untapped rare earth mineral and energy resources and that doing so would result in significant and broad economic benefits. Heritage Research has also detailed how the path set by Joe Biden would lead to foreign dependence, restrictions on consumer choice, scarcity-induced price inflation, and blackouts. Heritage has further argued that the CEQ regulation should not be judicially enforceable and that the United States needs sweeping permitting reform for more efficient and predictable permitting. That's Jack Spencer, Senior Research Fellow. President Donald Trump on Monday issued an executive order protecting the American people against invasion to achieve total and efficient enforcement of immigration laws against all inadmissible and removable aliens. The order directs the Attorney General and Secretary of Homeland Security to establish Homeland Security task forces in all 50 states, provide logistics, intelligence, and operational support to end the presence of criminal cartels, foreign gangs, transnational criminal organizations, and human smuggling and trafficking networks throughout the United States. The order directs a long list of tools to be used to enforce immigration laws, including alien registration, visa sanctions, and incentives to self-deport. It also requires a pause and analysis of contracts and grants given to non-governmental organizations, NGOs, that have facilitated mass migration, including termination and clawback authority, if appropriate. Heritage has consistently called for a return to fully enforcing immigration laws and to funding the NGOs that have been enriched for implementing mass illegal immigration to and throughout the United States. Now, I think that's interesting. The clawback would mean that any funds that have flowed out of the Biden administration to the NGOs, they better declare bankruptcy and hike it out of here to another foreign country pretty fast and transfer it into rubles or something, because that means that the feds can just go take it back. And I'm thinking about the Catholic Church right out of the gate. There have been some sanctuary laws that they have helped to facilitate human trafficking, and inadvertently or indirectly or directly have compromised laws that put them at odds with what the United States laws are. So, I mean, if if you and it's pretty standard procedure. You can't really, you're not supposed to make money off your crime. So if you facilitated a crime and you made a bunch of money, then that money basically gets lost once you get convicted and it gets sucked back out, right? Well, I think that's kind of what's happening here. This is like the cars that are seized in a drug run, right? Somebody bought themselves a Countach with their with the proceeds of their cocaine. Well, guess what? You don't get to keep that Countach. You have to lose it, and I think that's what's happening here. So heads up, NGOs, if you've got a lot of jewel encrusted stuff in your church, you might want to pack that away and send it back to Rome. And I'm not sure that Rome is going to be too happy about this either. But we'll see what happens. Let me take a pause right there, and we'll be back after this message. For those of you who have followed me over the years, thank you. For those that are new, I wanted to share with you really quick how I came to be here on WBN 324 on radio stations around the world each week, and where Atomic Biscuits has its origin. After spending my career as a technologist of several different flavors, I was privileged to find Patriot's Soapbox and make friends with that online gang while they were still in infancy. As that project grew, I joined as a fill-in host for some shows, eventually finding my way as a contributor to the morning show, PSB AM, with my little segment, Buttery Biscuits with BACFA. When that show eventually finished its run, I followed Last Scout and his band to a new home at LastScoutRadio.com, where there is a new broadcast every day, from Weed the People to Honeybee's Basement to Old Time Radio and more. You can escape the matrix and spend some time at the virtual watering hole with friends chatting on various streaming platforms. You can find hundreds of shows archived as well, including Atomic Biscuits. So if you're looking for something interactive and different, a place free of globalist scum, check out LastScoutRadio.com, buy some merch, and join in the fun. LastScoutRadio.com. This Daily Signal article is a really good sum up. And I need to cover some other stuff, but I want to keep going here for a little while. But I encourage you to come and get a copy of this, like save it to a PDF or something, because it's going to be a map to navigate the months and years ahead. This starting point is not. They didn't build this map yesterday. This has been in the works for years, and there's a lot of energy and power behind the push that will come very quickly. Among the many prior illegal and radical executive orders of former President Joe Biden that his successor, President Donald Trump, revoked on the latter's first day in office in his initial rescissions of harmful executive orders and actions, was Executive Order 14019, March 7th, 2021. That executive order, which Biden misleadingly titled Promoting Access to Voting, should have been titled Illegally Using the Federal Government to Manipulate Election Outcomes for the Democratic Party. Biden's executive order ordered federal agencies and federal employees to implement a get-out-the-vote operation using government resources and taxpayer funding that was clearly intended to benefit his political party. He had no constitutional or statutory authority to engage in such reprehensible actions, and in fact, spending federal funds on such activity violated federal law. Biden's Justice Department used its resources in court to fight all attempts to get the administration to disclose what it was actually doing and to stop its misbehavior. More information about this attempted election interference can be found at the Heritage Foundation Biden Executive Order 14019, Unlawful Interference in State Election Administration, and at the Daily Signal, Latest Federal Takeover of Elections Violates Federal Law. The new administration should ensure that all information hidden by the Biden administration is now publicly disclosed. That's also from Hans von Spakovsky. President Donald Trump's proclamation granting pardons and commutations of sentences for certain offenses relating to the events at or near the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021, ends, as Trump says, a grave national injustice and begins a process of national reconciliation. Such an action is authorized under Article 2, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution, which provides the president with the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States. That power only extends to federal crimes, not state crimes. A reprieve or commutation only reduces the sentence a defendant has received, while a pardon completely voids a conviction. This proclamation commutes the sentences of 14 named individuals convicted of various offenses related to what happened on January 6, 2021, allowing their immediate release from prison. It grants a full, complete, and unconditional pardon to all other individuals convicted of offenses related to January 6th, also allowing the immediate release of any individuals still incarcerated. Finally, the proclamation directs the Attorney General to pursue dismissal with prejudice of pending indictments against any other individuals, ending all further Justice Department actions. Also, Hans von Spakovsky there. And I think there'll be some people, and I know some people directly, who will be glad to see that they will no longer have to live on the run trying to figure out how to avoid FBI, CIA, NSA detection because their phone pinged within some distance of the violence, even though they weren't present. President Donald Trump's executive order on price relief shows that he's serious about reversing the damage done by the Biden administration on American family finances. The order recognizes the tremendous increase in the cost of living that has resulted from Biden's reckless government spending, war on energy production, and regulatory onslaught that has needlessly increased the cost of everything Americans need to thrive, including that 25% of the cost of building a new home is due to regulations. The order pledges over the next 4 years to reduce the annual cost of federal regulations by $11,000 per household and instructs all federal agencies to work to identify and remove regulations and restrictions that increase the cost of living for all Americans, including removing onerous regulations on the cost of appliances, home building, and the production of affordable energy. That's Richard Stern, director of the Grover M. Herman Center for the Federal Budget. President Donald Trump issued an executive order unleashing Alaska's extraordinary resource potential, which rescinds the previous administration's efforts to stop resource development in Alaska, clears federal bureaucracy, and empowers Alaskans to develop their resources for the benefit of Alaska and the United States. This executive order will help lower energy prices and empower Alaskans to develop their resources while protecting critical habitat and Alaska's cultural heritage. It opens the Arctic National Wildlife Preserve to development, expedites permitting and leasing in Alaska, prioritizing the development and sale of liquefied natural gas, orders federal agency heads to facilitate Alaskan resource development, and essentially clears a path for energy development in the state. Heritage Foundations consistently argued that developing Alaskan resources will benefit Alaska and the country. The gas and oil industry, for example, supports nearly 50,000 Alaskan jobs, accounting for 35% of the state's economy at $19.4 billion, and generally provides nearly 90% of the Alaskan government's general fund, putting over $180 billion in the state's coffers since Alaska became a state in 1959. Heritage has also argued against the false premise that Americans must choose between economic development on one hand and environmental protection and cultural traditions on the other. Indeed, responsible resource development provides the means to protect the natural environment and cultural traditions. To that end, rather than use alleged environmental concerns to justify federally imposed anti-energy policies, this executive order empowers Alaskans to drive policies forward that protect the state's natural beauty, cultural heritage, and economic interests. That's by Jack Spencer. Let me skip past the WHO one since we've already covered that. National emergency at the southern border. We kind of touched on that earlier. Promoting beautiful federal civic architecture. He's a builder, right? So wouldn't it be nice to have pretty buildings instead of brutal geometric shape? A deep sixing international tax deal. President Donald Trump wasted no time in torpedoing Biden administration's tax deal with the 38-country Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, that saddled American companies with extraterritorial taxes to foreign governments. Trump signed an executive order Monday that notified the OECD that any commitments made by the Biden administration with respect to a tax deal would have no effect. The executive order also warned that the Secretary of Treasury would consider protective measures against OECD countries that continue these discriminatory taxes against U.S. companies. Biden's Secretary of Treasury, Janet Yellen, in 2021 traveled to the OECD in Paris and negotiated a global minimum tax deal with the mostly European OECD countries that were eager to get a larger cut of tax revenues from U.S. multinational companies. Under the Biden-Yellen deal, large multinational companies disproportionately based in the U.S. were subjected to an undertaxed profits rule that arbitrarily allocated taxable income to higher tax countries adopting the OECD tax framework. The OECD global tax framework relies on a wide-scale adoption by OECD countries. Trump's strong rejection of the Biden-Yellen tax deal is intended to make countries reconsider their support for it. And I noted during the signing ceremony, he specifically called out BRICS nations and how they're going to have 100% tariff. Brazil might need to think about that. Cartels. On Monday, Trump issued executive order designating cartels and other organizations as foreign terrorist organizations and specially designated global terrorists, which declares a national emergency under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the IEEPA, to address cartels and transnational organizations that have flooded the U.S. with deadly drugs, violent criminals, and vicious gangs, including Tren de Aragua and La Mara Salvatrucha, the MS-13. Within 14 days, the order requires 1. The Secretaries of State, Treasury, and Homeland Security, the Attorney General, and the Director of National Intelligence to make a recommendation regarding the designation of any cartel or other organization as a foreign terrorist organization and or a specially designated global terrorist, and 2, the Attorney General and the Secretaries of Homeland Security and State to make operational preparations regarding implementation of any presidential decision invoking the Alien Enemies Act, any qualifying invasion or predatory incursion into the U.S. territory, and to prepare facilities to expedite the removal of such designated aliens. The Heritage Foundation has explained the tools available to an administration to pursue cartels, including the implications of designating cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. That's by Laura Reyes. There's lots more here. Putting America first in international environmental agreements. I think we know that we have exited the Paris Climate Accord, which was a big old money dump for Obama. Eradicating DEI. We've talked about that already. Birthright citizenship. This is going to be massive. This idea that unless both parents are legally in the United States, their child does not automatically get U.S. birthright citizenship. We've called them anchor babies for decades now, and it's created a leapfrog effect where once you get a citizen, then they can bring someone, and then they can bring someone, and they can bring. So the chain migration is being broken here. We'll see how that pans out. Gender ideology, we've talked about that. 2 sexes, and that's all the federal government will recognize. DOGE. On Monday, Trump issued an executive order establishing the new Department of Government Efficiency. This executive order, which is effective immediately, renames an existing federal office, the United States Digital Service, as the United States DOGE Service, and stands up a new organization within USDS named the U.S. DOGE Service Temporary Organization to pursue what the executive order describes as the president's 18-month DOGE agenda. The order likewise instructs agency heads to stand up DOGE teams within each agency to coordinate with USDS and advise the agency heads on carrying out regulatory reform. And it directs the head of the USDS to begin a software modernization program to improve the federal government's efficiency. Trump has also revived many of his first-term executive orders on the regulatory process, such as EO 13771, the 2-for-1 order, EO 13891 on guidance, and EO 13892 on administrative enforcement. He has followed standard practice by pausing regulations that have not yet issued and by urging agencies to delay recently issued regulations pending reconsideration by his team. This is Paul Ray writing, the director of Rowe Institute at the Heritage Foundation. There's going to be a lot of this stuff. What's interesting to me about DOGE is it reminds me very much of what Mark Levin writes in one of his books, the Freedom Amendment, I believe is what it's called. I think I've brought this up before, where on renewal, I mean, the power of the purse is held in Congress. Why not do some things to make these segments of this bloated government accountable? First, you've got to defend why you exist. Like, show us constitutionally why you exist. What purpose do you serve? Demonstrate that there's no duplication of effort elsewhere in the government. And then open your books and show how you spent the money. If you can't do those things, you don't get renewed. You don't get to keep going. There is no rubber stamp. There is no continue on. It just stops. So it forces them into a mode of defining who they are, what their space is, why they're legal, and what they're up to. And then make that available in an accountable way so that the people and Congress can look at what they're doing, if it's lawful, if it's legal, if it's fair, if it's needed. And we do this every time a new budget is built. Now, that would require some chutzpah on the part of Congress to take back their reins that they've so easily given over to the executive branch, where the executive branch has been writing their own laws. But in the wake of the Chevron decision, that's all changed. So it's a great time to carve up the administrative state and force Congress back into their regular legislative role to make rules and laws for the people, from the people, as opposed to dictatorially determining what we will be told to do. Well, scumbags, that's the last of Atomic Biscuits for today. I want to thank you for tuning in. I want to make sure that you tune in again next week right here on WBN 324 Talk Radio. Stay tuned. We're here 24/7 with talk from around the world. And tune in every Sunday for Sunday Long Live Radio right here on this station. Have a great week, everyone, and I'll see you next week for another Atomic Biscuits. So long.
Thanks for joining us for Atomic Biscuits. Tune in again next week for more news and music. Check out BACFA on Gab at BACFA, as well as Bitchute, Rumble, D-Live and Odysee. Check out LastScoutRadio.com for fun content. Listen to WBN 324 on radio stations around the world, on many streaming platforms, and World Broadcasting Network WBN 324.zil.